We are on part 2 in our teaching that we began last week with the title Trust in Wealth versus Wealth in Trust, part 2. But before I begin, I have a story to tell you. There was a very wealthy man, and he wrote in his will, and he's made sure that his wife knows his wishes when he passed away. So his will is basically very simple, that he wants to be buried with his entire earthly wealth. And his wife had a number of friends and socialite. When you are that high, you have teas and coffee and all this. And so she basically told her friends, one of her best friend, about this will. Well, sure enough, he died. And they had this lavish funeral service. They have this thousands of dollars worth of casket, and of course embalmed him and put him in his finest $1,000 tailored suit and buried him in this coffin. As always, if you've been to funerals, and I have been to a number of them, and you have a viewing. For the life of me, I don't understand that, but that's a tradition. And so they had this viewing, and the viewing, the public go in front of the casket, basically in the sign of saying final goodbye to the person who had passed away. And then the family usually line up on one side and shake hands, and people say the obligatory, sorry for your loss, right? We all say the proper thing. Well, as they were viewing this, one of her best friend was the last coming across, and she wanted to check the casket. I mean, she went, bent over and look, and then she walked over to the widow, and she bluntly said to her, the will says that you have to put his entire wealth and the money that he has and bury it with him. That's what the will said. And the widow says, yes, I did. And he's worth millions. She says, I know. Well, where are the millions? And she says, well, I wrote him a check and it is in his coat pocket. So with that in mind, I think it's very appropriate, okay? Christine is the only one laughing. Okay, I don't know whether you're laughing at me or you're laughing at the story. But it's appropriate, isn't it? All right, we think about taking, trusting wealth. But the thing that we need to understand is that the Bible is not anti-wealth, okay? There is nothing pious about the fact that you are poor, okay? Even though there have been, the Christian history have spawned a belief that poor is good and so forth. That's not true. If you look at the Bible carefully, we have some very wealthy people recorded. Abraham, one of the richest men, okay, in that era. You have King David. And that if you read, I believe it's the First King, the story of Solomon, you can't believe his wealth. And so the question is that the Bible does not really speak negative about wealth. But so how does we juxtapose the teaching of Jesus in regards to wealth? But I personally believe that it is not how much you own or what you own. It is the idea of what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 6, verse 21. At the end of, during the narrative, Jesus says, where your treasure is, there is your heart. So it is not whether you have, it's not how much you have. It is that what you have, the wealth you have, your trust in that. So do you put your trust in your wealth, or is the wealth in your trust? That is to say that it is okay, in my I believe that it's okay that you have lots of money. But it is not okay if your heart lies in the amount of money that you have. Rather, that if you are a follower of teaching of the book, which is the wealth of knowledge, isn't it? Isn't that right? Isn't that right? Wealth of knowledge, wealth of truth. And if you trust the wealth here, and you put the trust in the wealth here, and I think that you are, and I believe you are on the right track. And last Sunday, if you were here, that if you remember in chapter 16, you have your Bible open, and Jesus talks about a parable. And the parable of a man, the two men, right? A manager or a steward and the owner. Both of them are unrighteous, isn't it? Right? The guy who owns it, okay, he charges usury, loan. The guy who manages it, he cuts the corner. He cooked the books. And both of them are unrighteous. And the boss found out that he's been cooking the books, and he fired him. And the guy who was fired, the steward, he says, I got to save myself because I can't work. It's just too heavy for me. So what does he do? He cut the loan, right, from the people who owes the boss money. And then Jesus was telling this story. And in telling the story, Jesus says that the wicked, okay, unrighteous boss commended this wicked servant for being so shrewd. And if you read that parable, you're saying, wait a minute, Pastor, I thought you say that this is truth here. Truth is the God's truth. But if you read that parable, at the middle of verse 8, if you end it, if you put a period at the end of middle of verse 8, because if you do that, then Jesus stops telling the parable and Jesus makes a comment, right? And what Jesus said, in my interpretation, okay, is that Jesus is saying that this parable is not an illustration of righteous living, but this parable is saying that you can learn something from the world of their wisdom, albeit the wisdom is not righteous wisdom. You understand? And so I think sometimes as a Christian, we tend to be sort of, how do I say, not modest with our faith. We glowing in our faith, thinking that because I'm a Christian, then I have all the wisdom. And I don't think that is true. I think we can learn from people who are not believers, but yet they're very wise people. I love the story of Stephen Jobs. I love the biography that is on Netflix right now on Bill Gates. Neither one of them graduated from college. But if you read their biography, they're very wise. Even when they were very young, Bill Gates, he was a sophomore in college, University of Washington. He swept the floor of the lab where they had the computer. And in those days, young people, you may not remember this, but in those days, computer was huge. It occupied the whole basement. And Bill Gates wanted to write programs, and he couldn't afford it. Nobody can afford using it. So he volunteered. He says, I'll sweep the floor, I'll clean it, so you give me some hours so I can do programming it. There begins the whole idea of Microsoft, his software. I'm saying that you can learn something. And when he developed the software, he made one move that made him a billionaire. And he made his software at beginning open source. So people can use it and can adjust with it. And he was willing to do that. But he holds the key to the Microsoft. You guys now don't remember this. The first program, computer, if you want to open it, okay, you had to know it's not password. You had to know how to program. You have all these slash and all these things before you can actually open up the screen. But Microsoft came, was easy, password, but he opened it. And people can open it, they can adjust and everything. And Bill Gates became who he is today. So I believe that we can learn something from this. But yet, we also know that if you have your Bible open to Luke chapter 16, you notice in beginning verse 16, okay? All right? Verse 14. Jesus suddenly changed the audience. He beginning to talk about the Pharisees. Up until then, he's talking about the steward and then the managers. And Jesus talks about where your priority is. And then in the same time, Jesus changed the audience to the Pharisees. Jesus says the Pharisees are lovers, right? You see that? Lovers of money. Then Jesus says that the Pharisee was scoffing at Jesus. So not the Pharisees is a very interesting name that is given. Now we all know that the Pharisee at the beginning did not have that kind of reputation. Pharisee at the beginning was the people who wants to save the tradition of the Hebrew teaching. Their piety suggested that they believed that what was written in their Jewish Bible is true, and they want to live a life like that. It is when the time of Jesus that the Pharisees' theology become much more rigid, much more self-centered. You understand? But Jesus is speaking to the Pharisee that has sort of changed to the kind of person that they were. In fact, you can tell, okay, that they did not walk what the commandments say. They did not have the attitude of love thy neighbor as thyself. They were greedy. This Greek lovers of money actually should be saying that they attached to it, okay? In fact, the best way to translate into proper English is that they were greedy. And we know greed is one of the seven deadly sin, isn't it? Not only that, it says that they scoffing at what Jesus has been teaching. And this word scoffing is that they sort of physically wrinkle their nose. So in a sense then, the Pharisee here, they were smug, they were judgmental, their attitude was holier than thou. That the Pharisees' name itself today, we use it as an adjective, don't we? Sometimes you will hear, okay, among the Christian circle, so-and-so is Pharisaic. It means that the person is a hypocrite. But it wasn't meant to be that way. But yet we know. But yet you can see verse 15, okay? You see that? Verse 15, if you read it carefully, okay? And he said to them, Jesus said to the Pharisees, you are those who justify yourself in the sight of man, but God knows your heart. And I want you to underline that. And I think I have underlined. God is saying, you justify yourself in the sight of man. That word justify is the word that we get justification, right? As a Christian in our salvation, we come to Christ and Christ's blood shed, cleanse us, justify us. Justify means that it changes the code that you wore, sinful code. You take it off, somebody justify it, okay? Either they paid a price, they did something so that the sinful code is taken off. That's to justify. Now you are clean. So Jesus saying is that you justify yourself. In other words, they are so arrogant that they declare themselves to be clean. Then what's important is Jesus says, but God knows your heart. This is one of the greatest sins that the Pharisees made. And many of us do the same thing here. And that is to say, we allow our works to prove my justification. You understand? In other words, I donate, I serve, I preach, I study. My vocabulary are very gracious. I do all kinds of good things. Thereby, I am justified. But my justification is self. You catch this? But why does a so-called Christian justify himself? Because he thinks, think now, if a man thinks that he can justify himself, he has taken whose place? Come on, talk to me. We're small here. Whose place? God, isn't it? It's like a scale. You understand? You understand? That is to say, when a man who does good works, thinking that his good works makes him justified, he is taking the place of God because only God can justify us. Isn't that right? And that is dangerous. My challenge to you today is, you do the good works, which you should. But who you do it for? You're saying, oh, I do it because I'm a Christian. So are you saying to me that you do this work so you can be justified before God? Then where is Jesus? Why did he have to come? Why did Jesus have to die on the cross? We do this, don't we? At least I do. I feel that if more hours I spend studying, earlier I get up, the better it is. God forbid that during the time, my preparation, I take a break and watch Seahawk on television. Oh yeah, sometimes I feel really guilty. I'm not done, but I'm the Seahawks, my team. You catch this? And that's what Jesus says. They're trying to justify themselves. Paul says, warn the believers in the first century church that men will be lovers of self besides lover of money. They will be boastful, arrogant, disobedient. All right, we move on. So today, we go on. He said, justify yourself versus God knows your heart. And that Greek word knows is the strongest Greek word that they have for the translation to know. That is to say, God is intensively, intimately knows. There is nothing, there is no corner in the house you can hide from that. But then something else he says, okay? I'm sorry, I got jumped a little bit too far, okay? All right. He said, God knows your heart. And then he said, esteem a man detestable. You see that? Distasteful, okay? In the sight of God. God finds this whole attitude of man. He cannot bear this. And what God is demanding from us today is that he is the only way. There is no scale here. There is nothing you can do to balance this scale. It is when we serve him. When we give to him. We don't believe in penance anymore. We do not believe in purgatory theology. Then people say, why do I give then? You give because out of love with the kingdom. You give because you are told to give your tithe. You pray, you are told to pray. But we do all this not because it makes us holy. Catch that? That is what this whole thing is. The scale, the sovereignty of God. And so if you go to verse 17, you see, okay, Jesus talking about it. He says the people come, they push, they rush their way. But yet we know that it is not that simple. So if you have your Bible, it's very interesting that in verse 18, suddenly Jesus brings in this idea about divorce. I have to tell you, when I came to this part, I had to say, wait a second. What does this have to do with the parable of the unrighteous steward? What does this have to do with the slashing that Jesus that given about the Pharisees. Why does he all of a sudden bringing this idea about marriage, about this divorce thing? And it was very quick, only one verse. I believe if you go to the other places in the Bible talk about divorce, it's much longer. I believe it's not that I'm saying this is not because I'm saying it's okay to be divorced. In fact, it is not okay to divorce. But yet I failed. But the point here is, for me at least, the way I understand is, that the marriage was part at the beginning of the creation story. It was God's intention to have Adam and Eve to be married as to become one, and they ought not to break. And if they do break, then they have broken that covenant. Not the covenant between Adam and Eve. It is the covenant between Adam and Eve as one to God. You understand this? So what I believe that Jesus is saying here in this portion, he's talking about where your heart, where your trust is. And he talked about the way Pharisees hypocritically put their trust in what they can do. They justify themselves. They basically supplying who God is. And then Jesus says in verse 18, he says, look at this. From the creation time, a perfect illustration is that a man and woman made a covenant to be married, but that covenant is a covenant between that one to this one, which is God. So if you break this covenant between man and woman, you are essentially breaking what covenant? Between you and whom? You and God. You understand? And if that is the case, if you understand that, then altogether we need to understand that this covenant theology is a theology we need to embrace. Young people, you need to behave according to God's command, not because you are afraid of hell. You understand? Jonathan Edwards, in his famous sermon, scares people to death literally. And this is back in during the Great Awakening. Sinner at the hands of God. He preaches that way. He says, you are a step away from the burning hell. I mean, he literally scared people from hell. I do not believe that that's what it meant. I believe that this covenant that God has made with us illustrated the importance of men and women who are married make this covenant. And that this covenant is relational. So once again, to metaphorically speaking, put a mirror of your spiritual walk with God right now in front of you. Look at that mirror. What is the reflection that you see? Maybe I should ask, do you dare to do that? You know, sometimes when I get up in the morning, if the night before I wash my hair, if I don't get all dried up, in the morning, I turn on the lights, I look in the mirror, my hair is all up, especially I have my, 我是大头, you guys understand what a 大头is? It's a big head, okay? Okay? And so sometimes my hair's there, and I look in the mirror and say, oh man, George, who did you fight with last night? Right? So, metaphorically, if each one of you, mirror, reflecting your spiritual walk with God, what do you see? I'm serious. What do you see? This is when I came to this part, I believe that's what God is saying to me. George, what is your spiritual walk? How are you with the covenant with me? Serious. How is it? What is your covenant with me run by? How many times you preach? How much you give in offering? How many times you turn the Seahawk game off so that you can study and prove to God, I am more faithful. You understand what I'm saying? And I say to you this morning, put that mirror in front of you. You're the best judge, right? What is your relationship with God like? And so it's interesting. At the end of this, you would think that this will be the end of the story, isn't it? That Luke should go into something else. But instead, Luke continues to tell us that during this period of time, Jesus spoke another parable. And this parable, every one of you who have been to Sunday school knows Lazarus, right? And the rich man. So I'm going to make a proposal that we take these familiar parables, and I see 3 twos here. Okay, 3 twos. First, you will see 2 men. Second, you will see 2 destinations. Third, you will see 2 desperate prayer, okay? 2 desperate prayers that God did not answer. God could not answer. You say, wait a minute, I thought God, nothing is impossible with God. Yes, that's true. But God cannot do anything go against his person, right? Isn't that right? For example, God has to be immutable. He cannot not be immutable. Because that's not him by nature. So what I'm saying to you is that there are 2 desperate prayers that God cannot answer. So there are 3 twos. Let's take a look at the first 2. The first 2 is a character here. You can see the story. You can read this, right? We usually read the whole text before we preach, but I thought this would be another way to preach this message, just taking you section by section. You read this, and you see that there's a rich man and there's a poor man. And the rich man is described very clearly. Notice that he's dressed, but he's habitually, you need to underline that. And what is he dressed in? Purple. And biblically, purple color most of the time means what? One of dignitary, you understand? And that's the reason why oftentimes you see people in a church, they have a cross, they have a purple cloth that drape over it. Okay, implying that the person who died, Jesus on the cross, is dignified. You understand? Which is it's kind of an oxymoron, isn't it? How can you be dignified being crucified on the cross? But that's the whole essence about redemption, isn't it? He who is without sin died for us so that our sin can be cleansed. So that's why there's a purple cloth hanging around the cross. So this man dressed in purple. Not only dressed in purple, fine linen, he living in a splendor every day. So in other words, this rich man, not only he's wealthy, you can see him being wealthy, but he does it regularly. But I want you to know that this rich man, Jesus never gave a hint that he was a wicked man. You catch this? In fact, his lifestyle matches exactly the lifestyle of people in those days. When they're walking down the street, you know that this man is a wealthy man. He has good name. He probably owns a practice with his name in front. Shen and Sons. I have always thought that would be nice. If why can't I be a businessman, a lawyer or something? Name card, Shen and Sons, okay? But this is a picture. So this is a man. Then you have a poor man. You will notice immediately Jesus gave a name for this poor man. This rich man had no identification. This man, his name is Lazarus. And the word Lazarus in this sense has a very much meaning. Okay? In fact, we won't talk about this until later, but the fact is, Jesus says, this man, Lazarus, and that he is sitting at the gate. Now, I don't have that underlined here, I don't think. So you need to be at that gate will come back. In a minute, we'll talk about that. He is covered with sore. longing to be fed with the crumbs. Need to underline that word, crumbs which were falling from the rich man's table. Okay? So, in other words, you have two type of people. A person who is dignified, a person who is looked up to in the society, and he lets you know that he is Shen, and sons. On the other hand, you have this man, a poor man, sitting or laying down at the gate. In Hebrew, the word gate always ties into judgment. Okay? So in another sense, almost as if the society said, people in the gate, you deserve. You're homeless, you sleep under the freeway bridge, you're homeless. Right? If you sleep in the tent and the tent is in a park, you're homeless. It ties in. And so this poor man, it ties in over here, but his name is Lazarus. Okay? And then he's longing to be fed with the crumbs, which is the leftover, isn't it? With the crumbs. And then he has sore on his side. So in the sense that if we put life as a teeter-totter, you would say that the poor man, right? The poor man is on the bottom. And there's no way that he could be up until somebody fix it. And this is a picture that I see here, that you have two persons in opposite end of the spectrum. One is dressed, and one is dressed opposite. One eats, and the other person takes what is left over. So you have two persons. But then something happens if you continue to read. All right? Because we need to understand that John says this, whoever has the good, see his brother needs and close his heart against him, how does the love of God abide in him? And that's the reason why not only two persons, you have two destinations. And so we go to the next portion of this parable, we find. He says, now the poor man died. Right? And then what's the next one? Rich man, what? Also died. Make sure you circle that word also. Because the reason why I believe it's important that also, it means that priorly, right? The first part, two men, completely opposite. On the teeter-totter, completely. One is up, one is down. And there's no way you can change that. Now suddenly, we know there is a common denominator, and that it is death. And this parable says, poor man died. We know that. But the rich man also died. So suddenly, the teeter-totter has been made what? Equal, isn't it? And that equality is God's ordained. We all live east of Eden. Death awaits all of us. Doesn't matter, no matter how wealthy you are, how poor you are. The creation story is part of the equality. And I want you to know that, young people. So no wonder Job says something that I thought always so cool. At the end of chapter 1, Job has lost everything. And his wife told him, Job, curse God and die. Young man, I hope God be merciful to you, that you do not marry a woman like Mrs. Job. I mean, can you imagine? During his toughest time, Mrs. Job says, curse God and die. But yet what does Job say? Talk about a man of wisdom, isn't it? He says, naked I come, naked I go. Right? But the best part is the last phrase. Blessed be the name of the Lord. You say, Pastor George, why is that so important? That means Job is very wise, isn't it? Even in his most desperate moment, he sees that the teeter-totter now has made what? Even, isn't it? It's made even. It doesn't matter how rich you are, how healthy you are, how much education you have, what kind of cars you drive, or where you live, or where you graduated, how many letters behind your name. It doesn't matter, because when the time comes, because we are east of Eden, because of Adam and Eve, there is a natural balancing act, and naked you come, naked you will go. But Job, the man of God, says what? Blessed be the name of the Lord. He reconciled. Frank Sinatra is all wrong. You probably don't even know who he was, right? Frank Sinatra had a song that it became almost a model, and many of them still live today. I did it my way, okay? Go home and Google it. It's horrible narratives. The idea of I drink it and I spit it out, I choose what I do. I did it my way. And then I say to myself, yes, okay. I say, wait a second. That's not the teaching of the Bible, is it? The teaching of the Bible says, blessed what? Be the Lord. Okay? And so we keep in mind all this. Okay? The end seems to be the greatest equalizer, but that is not true, because we know that that he ended up in hell. He cried out. Okay, he was in torment. All right, and we know. All right, that he begged Abraham to do something. In this case, it's probably a metaphor for God, but it's okay. He begged that Abraham will do something, okay? But I want you to know that there's two men, not equal at the beginning, and the destination is not equal. You catch that? Even though they all die, but the destination is not equal. Young people, the reason why we should find calmness and peace and joy of studying his word is that the great equalizer is right here, right? At the beginning, it was like this. There was no way that poor man, but we are all going to die. But that's not the end of the story. The death is the equalizer machine, but that equalizer now turns out what? Like this, isn't it? Blessed be the name of the Lord. Young people, that should be a wonderful phrase for us to remember. I know you think you'll never get old. Trust me, I was your age. My first 7th grade teacher, his name was A.E. Guide. He was mean to me. He was like 6'7". He's skinny as a rail. I was trying to learn English, and my English was horrible. And one time he looked at me, and he never called me George. He said, Shen, when are you going to learn this? And I would look at him. I said, man, I'm never going to be this old. I am much older than Mr. Guide now. So young people, I tell you, there is an equalizer. But that equalizer will turn that scale. All right? We could see the two destinations are not the same, is it? He is being cast down into hell, Hades. And Lazarus has been living in the bosom of Abraham. So we say to ourselves, here you have a picture. The truth of eternity is that it causes you, says you can remember, you can see that the people are comforted, okay, in agony. I do not believe that this parable is some sort of a metaphor that Jesus is trying to tell us. I believe what Jesus says in this parable is exactly how it is. And that is to say, the people that is with him and the people that is not with him, the completely opposite. I believe that the people who's not with him in hell is suffering, is tormented. Okay, C.S. Lewis says that hell is like a place where you are all alone. There is no opportunity for fellowship. There is no we and they. You are, you are. You are there, there. Whereas over here in heaven, you fellowship. Isn't that right? You read Isaiah chapter 60. One of my favorites. When I'm in doubt what heaven's going to look like, go to chapter 60, Isaiah. Go there. Go chapter 55 towards the end. That's what opposite. So that's what Jesus is saying here. So the truth of eternity, the difference of destiny cannot be mistaken. And one of the things, I still have time, if you give me a few more minutes, there is a theology teaching out there that I believe that it is dangerous. And you need to write this down, and you need to Google it, and you need to study more. It is called open theism. It is in preaching today in many churches. In short, what is open theism? It is based on a paradigm of a friendly God. That is to say, that if long enough that God can save all of us, we all can be, that God is kind, that he is loving. Christian scholar R.C. Sproul, for example, John MacArthur, for example, says this kind of teaching is saying that you can manageable deity. That is to say, they are preaching this message saying God cannot be this way. Everybody will be saved. Everybody eventually will live in a place of great joy. That this teaching is wrong. You guys ever read Narnia Chronicles? Aslan, the fierce but loving lion, is a metaphor for Christ, isn't it? His paw frighteningly sharp as a knife, but yet he is gentle. One time somebody asked C.S. Lewis, who wrote the story, and he says, people who have not been in Narnia sometimes think a thing cannot be good and terrible at the same time. C.S. Lewis says, that is not true. That, young people, is open theism. People cannot accept a loving God that will deem people to hell. That's not true. Two people, two destinations. My question to you is, I know you're young, and I know that you don't think that you think that you have many years, and you do. You have many opportunities. Yes, you do. But there's that equalizer. Finally, it's interesting in this parable. Two men, two destinations, and two desperate prayers. He prayed to Abraham, saying, you send this rich man, right? Using the tips. I think maybe I know. Yeah. He said, dip the tip of his finger water, right? He's not asking for a cup of water. He's just wondering, just tip of it and quench him there. This is reflecting how Lazarus lived. What was he eating? His main source of food is what? Come on, talk to me. Was what? The crumbs, isn't it? On earth. Now in heaven, this rich man, he's asking for what? Not cup of water, right? He's asking for what? Just what? Crumbs, right? Just dip. Talk about Jesus' sense of humor, huh? Isn't that interesting? And the reason why I say this is that we need to know, okay, that in the Lord's Prayer, there's a phrase there. I want you to pay attention, okay? Say it with me. Thy kingdom come, okay? Thy will be done, what? On earth as it is in heaven. I truly believe we don't say the Lord's Prayer. We should do that every Sunday. If the leaders of, okay, you people, young people, you plan this out, I would really be tickled to death if we recite the Lord's Prayer in the worship. Because this phrase basically saying is what? What it is done here, right? It is done up here, right? Isn't that right? Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on what? Earth as what? It is in heaven. This rich man, he knows that this poor man eat the crumbs. Now he is in hell, and he's asking for what? Crumbs. So what God is saying to me is, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in what? In heaven. That which we do here in his name on earth will transfigure what it is will take place in heaven, isn't it? So young people, do not think that every dollar or every hour that you spend serving in his kingdom is for naught. That when you die, you go to heaven. Nothing. No, because this prayer is Jesus' prayer saying what we do here on earth will transfigure to where? Come on, to where? Up there. We don't make the connection, do we? We think what we do here is que sera, sera. But thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. That rich man was not a bad man. That rich man represents a lot of us. Never thought that what he does on earth reflects on what it is the end. Isn't that right? This idea of spiritual transfiguration is not something ontologically that's just sort of like a cloud in the air. No, it's just really existential. What we do here in his name will transfigure to what we will get in heaven. So don't think that when you give to the least, that is, you throw your crumbs at them. You open your wallet and give them the change. What God wants us to do is to think that this kingdom of God, that it is here, and the kingdom of God that is up there is connected. That what you do here is not something you say, well, when I die, I just go to heaven. No, 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 no. Thy will be done on earth, and it is in what? In heaven. That somehow, mysteriously, I don't understand all the detail, but I really believe it transfigured to what will happen in this place. Because in Isaiah 60 gives a picture of heaven where there will be things going on. We're not going to be sitting in a rocking chair eternally and just saying, hallelujah. No, no, no. There's going to be activities. The Bible talks about wearing different crowns, isn't it? With receiving the reward that is due for us. So young people, what are you doing? Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done. Because thy kingdom come, thy will be done. It's not just today. It's not just here. It will be transfigured. And let us hope, my hope is that today, that you will be making a decision, knowing what you're doing here is recorded that will transfigure that. In his name you serve. In his name you give. In his name you attend services regularly, Friday night. Because all that will transfigure into eternity. Finally, most interesting thing is, he says, remember, and then the parable, Abraham, remember he makes a request. Isn't that right? He said, give me the water. He says, I can't. He said, okay, if you cannot give me the water, tell my friends and my family about my suffering. And you can't. Those two pleas, God cannot answer. Two prayers, God cannot answer. Why? Because there is a chasm. There is a gulf between eternity, which is here, the eternity which is here. So it behooves us, at least for me, anytime I know that he's going to take me, anytime I will leave this earth. And you will too, because that is the equalizer, isn't it? But the question for you is, how are you looking at this? These two prayers God cannot answer. Why? Because of the eternity as planned out by God, that the differences of the two destinations is so wide, even God cannot answer. That means you need to put that mirror in front of you and check your spiritual walk with him. Finally, I will close with this. C.S. Lewis wrote a book. I have a copy, and you should get one, okay? Very cheap on Amazon. It's called The Great Divorce. C.S. Lewis, I don't agree entirely of some of his theology, but I do believe he has some insight. He wrote a fictional novel, a story called The Great Divorce. He's talking about a busload of people from hell that have gone to heaven. And he points out that some people on that bus, when they get out, had to go back to hell because it doesn't fit. Isn't that interesting? They walk on the ground, and some of them went back to the bus, and they ask him, why are you going back? He said, I don't fit this place. You're also wondering, a person go to heaven and say it doesn't fit? Well, that's it. That's what C.S. Lewis' whole theology is. He says the whole life of Christian must understand it's either or. Some people today, he says, find this embracing alternative. There always be an alternative. There must be another way. And I want you to know, C.S. Lewis says, and here's this analogy. You cannot take all luggages with you on all your journeys. On one journey even. Sometimes maybe you cannot even take your right hand or your right eye. But you have to leave something behind. He's saying that we must make a choice. We must make a choice. Young people, today you have to make a choice. You cannot buy into this open theism that somehow eventually everybody is going to end up to be saved. You must make a decision today which choice you are making. He says something that I want to read it and give it to you, and I will close with that. He says, for people who choose the world instead of God, earth itself will turn out to be a suburb of hell. While for those who follow after God, earth will prove to have been from the beginning a part of heaven itself. That's a wonderful insight. That's a wonderful insight. So if you have chose God, then your life living in this earth, you should have experienced, even if just an edge of the heaven itself, that the peace that Paul talks about passes all understanding, right? That Paul talks about, that he can do all things through Christ who strengthened him. But if you have not, then you are, at the same time, you are living in the suburb of hell. Bow your heads with me, please.